Now, as Nigeria wriggles out of recession, the economy is getting some respite, but can we say the same for the state of security in the country? My guest for today is Ona Ekhomu. He's the president of the Association of Industrial Security of Safety Operators of Nigeria, ISON. He joins me to give a scorecard on the state of security in Nigeria. Thank you so much for taking the time out to join us today.
Good morning, ma'am.
Let's start with the Global Terrorism Index that tracks, the number of attacks across the globe, released by the Institute for Economics and Peace. Now, according to the report for 2016, it states that terrorism or deaths related to terrorism by Boko Haram dropped by as much as 80% in 2016. It put it in specific terms. It said that's 3,100 fewer people killed in 2016. Your thoughts on this index? It also, Nigeria still ranks third on the list of countries most impacted by terrorism. What are your thoughts on these findings?
Well, I think we are moving in the right direction in terms of security, because if we have such a huge number of fewer deaths from perhaps year-on-year 2015, then we can say that there was significant improvement. Now, I'm worried that the ranking of Nigeria stayed very low, which meant that the vulnerabilities here were still critical, were high. That meant a lot of attackers, a lot of terrorists could exploit the vulnerabilities within the system to carry out attacks. But the fact that the fatalities were low is quite significant and something to be celebrated. Now, what are the factors that informed the third place ranking? That's third from bottom ranking, which is very negative anyhow. You see, when GTI looks at this index, it doesn't look only at Boko Haram attacks. It looks at anything that has definition of terrorism, any act that terrorizes the population. So it's not just Boko Haram attacks. Yeah, sure, Boko Haram attacks, that accounted for that 80% fewer deaths from those suicide bombings or the attacks or whatever they do. But when you look at things like some of the terroristic attacks we see, the very gory deaths from herdsmen attacks and things, those are also considered terrorist attacks. Kidnappings is a classic terrorist attack. So, these kinds of things, the ambushes, the shootings, that we see, the things that by definition are terrorism go into that number. So that's what makes it very high in terms of the incidents, because the ranking is based on incident of terrorist attacks, the number, the actual counts of terrorist attacks. But then you see what happened here is that the fatality is lower, or is positive in our favor with 80% fewer, because we don't have those kinds of fantastic, the terroristic attacks that Boko Haram used to have, where they used to kill people in very large numbers. Okay,
so we just moved up one notch, because I know that as far back as 2014, we're at least fourth on the ranking after the likes of Iraq and Syria. So I'm thinking, what does this say about the federal government's strategy to curb the activities for 2016? We're going to talk about 2017. That's a different ballgame, but we're still talking about 2016.
It meant that the government strategies moved in the right direction. They worked. We are better off with fewer deaths. Let's look at that fatality, because for a security standpoint, in terms of criticality rating, we always look at deaths at the biggest thing that could happen. Before you start talking about...
So it's deaths on one hand, and then the attacks, the
frequency, exactly. So the count was negative, because there are so many other things that go into that equation, that's into the index, into the ranking. But the deaths were lower, because the death per attack, of course, was quite lower. But it also meant that I think perhaps this says something about the government strategy. It meant that there was much of a focus on reducing Boko Haramism than any other terrorist incident. So it's a definitional problem now. How does the government see terrorist acts our government, how do we see terrorists as, and how is it seen outside the shores of this country? How are other people looking at it? Because the Americans will see a kidnap incident and say, that's one terrorist act. But here in Nigeria, we say, they're just playing. So, but they're not playing. Nobody's playing. They are counting everything up for us. So
do you think that perhaps, because the collation of this index and the numbers that came out of it, coinciding with that time, that big victory that the army had in Sambisa Forest, do you think that is also...
Of course, that's
that was a major contributor. Okay, let's quickly talk about 2017. I was reading, the timeline of attacks this year, and it looks like there was momentum from May this year up until around August, September, and we've had, incidences here and there, some recorded, some not recorded, and it would appear that the strategy somewhat remains the same, hitting soft targets, using suicide bombers, and we've seen an increase in the use of female suicide bombers, and it's been quite difficult for the army to get around there because you really don't know when it's going to hit. And we see that happening in other countries, even with advanced intelligence levels, they still get caught unawares when it comes to suicide bombing. So I'm thinking, your thoughts on how the army has been able to handle that, and of course the frequency of those kind of attacks this year?
Well, you see, first of all, the army is doing a good job in tackling terrorists. That's the Nigerian brand of terrorists. That's Boko Haramism in the main, and hunting for them. But they are not doing a good job in terms of stopping the suicide bombers. And they cannot do a good job. It's not their job, actually. It's the job of intelligence and job of the citizenry and the police agency. That lies elsewhere, because those female, a little child somewhere in a house that's been indoctrinated, brainwashed, and then laden with a bomb, lives in a house somewhere. That is not the role of the army. The army cannot be everywhere. It's not ubiquitous, as it were. So, having said that, the army can respond if there's a frontal attack, if there's a frontal threat against the community, and the army is duly notified. The army can respond. That's why the president, in the last 24 hours, gave an order that a battalion be placed in Zamfara State to tackle these rustlers who come from neighboring countries and frontally attack communities, kill people, carry cattle away. So he said, okay, our response to that is to put the army in the middle of that, such that when there's a call out, instead of coming from Kaduna, which is way off, they can respond from right there, Zamfara, on scene. Now, he also created an 8th division of Nigerian army to cover Gusau, cover Sokoto, and it's moving that brigade from Sokoto out to Gusau, so that will now operationalize the new division of 8th division of the Nigerian army. So we now have a new division, 8th division. So why I'm saying all of that is the army's role is to deal with frontal attacks. The army cannot become an intelligence agency. It's not. Okay, so that's the job of state security, that's the job of the police agency, and that's the job of all other agencies out there, all those alphabet soup name agencies that are there, civil defense, community agencies, civilian JTF, what have you.
Okay, so if we rate the frequency of those attacks, and of course the ability of the intelligence agencies to, I don't know, be on their A game, as it were.
Because they must disrupt them. It's not something that you survive. You go in there. Why the deaths have been low is very interesting, is that because these are hastily planned, not well put together attacks, except Mubi. Mubi was a high death event, 50. Or whatever number, between 20 and 50 dead anyhow. Now, but most of the other events have been 2 dead, 4 dead, you understand, in that area. Because those have been what we call tactical IEDs. They put out the IEDs and they hit only those in the Brisant area. But the Mubi IED was a strategic IED. And I'm happy that the Air Force came out within the last 24 hours and said that they have conducted ISR is intelligence, surveillance, and recce flights, and they have discovered where the bomb was built in Sambisa Forest. And so
Sambisa Forest is still active, as it were.
Oh, well, they are there. I think I said to you on this program some time ago that, look, when the military came on frontally, these bad guys just melted away That's why when you captured Sambisa Forest, when you captured Camp, is it Camp 1 or Camp 0, whatever, the HQ of BH, there was nobody to shoot because they had melted away. That's what it was. So now you cannot hold down that forest. It's a big area. You can't hold it down. So what happened? When you pull back to the city like you will, they repopulate, and that's the problem we have. So we must continue to fly those. What the Air Force is doing right now is good because they went there and pulverized. They bombed the facility where they built that bomb, the one that was used in Mobi, the device that was used in Mobi. So that was a well-constructed bomb, and there was a bomb maker. So I hope they got the bomb maker too, because that's a problem. We must go at the source so that we can eliminate the source of the problem, not just the little kids who carry this bomb into the places. Okay. Of course, those ones we must intercept also.
Talking about going to the source, funding is key for terrorist groups, and we know that Boko Haram also receives funding, but it's not, it doesn't receive sophisticated funding like the likes of ISIS and some other, yes. The Taliban, the Al-Shabaab and the rest of them. But we know they have received some funding, even from ISIS and Al-Shabaab. So I'm thinking, I don't know to what extent we know how structured their financing is, funding is, and if we are able to get to the source of that funding. Well,
I have studied BH funding for quite a while. There's a lot of ways they get their funding. The fish market in Baga, that's been a big source of revenue for them. Of course, you are familiar with all their kidnappings of, in fact, if you remember, even the Chibok girls gave them a good hefty 50 million.
Okay, so ransom, okay.
Oh, ransom. Cash ransoms, okay. Oh, cash ransom is a big source. Now, they do a lot of threats, extortion. That's they call up a big guy in an area and say, look, we're going to kill you and your family if you don't pay up. So that has...
we know this for a fact.
Oh, yes. That has been, that has been one of their ways of getting money. So now what we say to people is, look, anytime you get these death threat calls, just report to the authorities and, probably relocate or enhance your security. Don't give in to those threats. That's it. Because what ends up happening is that we strengthen them, we give them resources with which to do evil. But they do a lot of, okay, if you remember recently, the Abu Musab al-Banawi group kidnapped those 3 workers from Unimed. The two professors and the driver. Exploration. Yeah, the oil exploration. They took them, and they are still waiting to be paid. They said because Abu Musab al-Banawi, sorry, not Zakawi, actually studied kidnap for ransom in Algeria. So he's a trained kidnapper. He's good at that. Interesting.
We're going to hold that thought for us. We're going to continue with the rest of the program, and of course on that too. I've been speaking to Ona Ekhomu, President of the Association of Industrial Security and Safety Operators of Nigeria. We have been examining the state of security in Nigeria this year. Still with me is Ona Ekhomu, President of the Association of Industrial Security and Safety Operators of Nigeria. Thank you so much, Ona, for sticking around. Let's continue from where we picked up. We talked about funding for Boko Haram and how they get their funding, but it hasn't just been Boko Haram related terrorism that we've had this year. We've also seen that from the Niger Delta, especially the Avengers, the main group that we know, and of course the activities of the cartel headsmen. Let's talk about the Niger Delta situation. We've seen relative peace this year, and we know that that's largely attributed to the peace talks that the federal government has had. But then we've had 1 or 2 threats, and I think one major issue has been one group comes out that they recognize, and then there's a splinter group from that same group. So it's difficult to put a face to who do we go and have these peace talks with and negotiate with. But what are your thoughts in terms of how the activities in that region this year and how the government has been able to get around it?
Well, I think the government has done a very good job in terms of keeping the peace in Niger Delta and ensuring that oil mining activities go undisturbed in that region. But the government had made a lot of promises, which the Avengers or whoever, the militants are now saying, let's call them militants as a group. I'll address the splintering in a second, which the militants have now said are not being kept. The promises are not being kept. And that's why they are threatening, they are, rattling their saber and saying that they want to resume attacks. Now, I hope, and I have said before, that I hope that the government will quickly assuage the concerns of these militants and say to them, listen, guys, like the Minister of Niger Delta said the other time, it takes time to accomplish some of these things. But, perhaps do more, just ramp up things a little bit more. And then also stop a lot of the softer things that create disaffection, the kind of careless talk and, pronouncements that don't help matters, because all Nigerians are owners in this Nigerian project. And people feel that sometimes when people get mad, it's not because you didn't build a bridge or a road or something. Or in fact, look at the Okerenkoko University thing, for example. That is so easy to put online. And, so there are things you can do as good faith measures, such that people will say, okay, these guys they are really trying. Okay, yes, we know X, Y, Z hasn't been done, but these ones have been done. And that will kind of build confidence and enable people hold on while other measures are coming in. But when you have a situation where it's like, okay, well, we told you that we'll do something, they start getting angry. Now, I was talking with someone in government and they said, oh, well, we came out of the recession not because of the increase in oil revenue. I say, it doesn't matter. Nigeria doesn't have anything to, we don't have any revenue to lose, as it were, to say, okay, let's trifle with this one. You need everything on the table and, to come into the national coffers, because you have a huge population, you have people, there are needs. We are probably one of the poorest countries in the world, and so on and so forth. So anything that brings income into this country should really be prized. And so that's what I said. I mean, something that accounts for 80–90% of your foreign earnings should not be trifled with. I mean, so that's the issue here. Now, about the splintering. Well, we know that the main militant organization right now in that region is NDA, that's Niger Delta Vendors. Of course, there are so many. There's I did a paper recently where I identified about 32 militant organizations. There are so many others out there. But by and large, most of them kind of look up to NDA because they have shown more capability.
In terms of being organized.
In terms of being organized, in terms of being funded, in terms of being, have material, that's implements of war, and so on. So I think we can safely say, just like MEND in 2009 was the flagship militant organization, NDA can be recognized as the flagship. And in fact, it was because of the agreement that the government reached with NDA last year. That's why we have this peace now. If you remember, between February, when NDA started its attacks, and I think about July, August, I mean, this country was practically on its knee. Okay, so we don't want to get on our knees again. That's what I'm trying to say. As
far as peace is concerned, I mean, taking a long-term view, for the Niger Delta situation, it's all about, social, economic development. Fix our roads, give us jobs,
I think so.
Develop the region, and then there'll be peace.
I think so.
But should we also come to terms with the fact that, regardless, these groups are here to stay, and whenever they feel that the region is being neglected, their elders, who are their representatives, are shortchanging them. They've accused them many times of that. Then we should expect to see those attacks. So they're like just there
Much of the problem of the group is actually from the local leadership. It's not from outside. Yes, of course, Nigeria is full of inequities. That's one. That's just a statement that's there. But having said that, much of the resources that are flowing into the region are also not being judiciously applied because of, whatever, because of poor leadership, or let's say poor governance. Local governance, now I'm talking about. I'm not talking about national governance. We have national governance issues, but local governance is a big problem.
Okay, so holding those local the chiefs, the elders, is also key.
And political, not just the chiefs, elders, the political elite also. In fact, particularly the political elite, because most of the resources flow to the political elite, and they are diverted into private hands and foreign banks At least that's the allegation. I've not seen any floating around there.
Let's talk about cattle herdsmen. That also made lots of headlines this year. At a point, became a very major issue. And we know some of the affected states, Benue in particular, was forced to pass a law, the anti-open grazing law. And, it appears to be working. Ekiti has also, come up with some measures to keep that in check. And, a lot of stories about whether or not they're actual terrorists or just herdsmen carrying weapons and defending themselves or attacking. So that argument has gone back and forth this year. But what are your thoughts in terms of how we handle that situation this year? Okay,
first let's look at the threat before we talk about countermeasures. The threat is you have legitimate herdsmen going about their normal business, herding their cattle, selling their cattle, providing meat, protein for the population, which is good, normal business. Now, the problem is because of the stress and strain on the land, because, population is growing, the urbanization is growing.
And perhaps there's a desertification too.
Desertification is driving more herdsmen down south. There's now that contact culture. There's that clash because the farmers want to grow their crops. They are sedentary people, and the herdsmen want to eat and move on. So they're like, no, you can't do that. You got to go somewhere else. Now, what happens is when there's a clash, when there's a misunderstanding between a community and a herder, what happens, GSM is very useful. GSM call is made somewhere, and now a militia, that's the terrorist act now, the militia, the AK-47 tough-skinned guys come in and deal with the situation. That's like what you saw in Enugu and what we've seen around in communities around this country. Everywhere, it's so common. They come in, deal with these guys, and they pull back. So yes, when McBan, that is Mieti Allah Cattle Breeders Association, say our people are not, they are not terrorists, they are not killers, they are not fighters. They are right, the people, but the people invited, they called in a militia to fight a war for them.
Called by the herdsmen themselves.
By the herdsmen themselves. So there is liability because in any place, look at what you just said about the Benue situation. Now that the open grazing law is in phase, I mean, it's too early to evaluate that law to kind of analyze it and see whether it's working well or not. But now that it's in place, at least there is a reduction in conflict between farmers and herders. So when people say to me, oh yes, the herdsmen don't tote AK-47 rifles around, I say, yes, they don't. But when they feel threatened, and they have said so, I've seen Mieti Allah president come out and say that when our people are threatened, they push back. Yes, of course, that's a natural human reaction also just to say. So, but the point here is what is the level of threat? That's why I say let's look at the threat. What is the level of threat? What is the frequency of that threat? What is the risk associated with the threat? That means threat, the asset value times threat times vulnerability. And then what is your countermeasure? The countermeasure is always greater than the threat or the risk that was posed in the first place. That's the issue. That's why we don't encourage vigilantism. We don't want vigilantes to take the law.
A state like Ekiti State has that, and they claims it's effective. They've arrested some herdsmen.
Yes, and probably slaughtered their cattle too illegally. But what I'm saying is, I'm saying vigilantism like when people set people ablaze, like the Alu4 and all those. Anytime people take the laws into their hands, they don't know the laws. So when you take it into the line, you exceed it. And that's what those people who make that GSM call to the militia are doing. They are taking the laws into their hands to redress their issue. Instead of going to the local police department to report that, look, I went into this guy's farm, we ate a little bit of his corn, we want to pay, but he's making trouble with me. I mean, that's what a reasonable law-abiding person should do.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you on the show today.
Madam, I appreciate
I've been speaking to Ona Ekhomu, President of the Association of Industrial Security and Safety Operators of Nigeria.